This is Continuum Drag, a podcast where we watch sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, The City and the City, episodes 1 and 2.
Witnesses saw a yellow van around here. All looks like a Basel crime to me.
Maybe this is a case for breach.
Breach?
We need to consider every possibility.
Breach didn't manifest, so it's a murder. I'd like to get on and investigate it.
You don't want me to put someone else on it?
Why?
You know why, Paul. I mean Gunterstrasse. First time you've been back there, isn't it? Everything's all right with you?
Everything's fine. At least it wasn't until I walked in here.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast out of focus. I'm Luke, here's my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
There was a really good line in this first episode that I liked, and I'm going to start using that when people ask me what it's like to have a podcast, and I'm gonna quote the main character. I'm going to say, it's my duty and my penance. My penance. I ruined it once again. It's my duty and my penance. You know?
Oh, penance. I thought that's not what I thought you said the first time.
Yeah, it's my duty and my penis is what it sounded like I mumbled, but it's not as cool to say it in a gravelly voice that, you know.
Anyway, we should probably bring our guest in. We're joined by returning guest Steven. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. So excited to be back.
What were you on for last time? I was trying to remember.
That's an excellent question. I can't remember. All I remember is being left out of the countdown, the 100th episode or year-end episode, season 5. I can't remember. You guys did
I feel like the same thing I said to Jane, but I know it's not right. But I remember the Langoliers very well, but I don't think that was the last time you were on.
It actually might have been. It might have been a bit of a sign to my popularity. That was
I don't know. Back. I also feel like there must have been one between Langoliers and now, but wait. So in our recap, you weren't mentioned? Is that what you're saying?
Not once. I wasn't on the list for anything. Worst show,
hey, maybe
best
give
show.
something a better grade.
I overgraded all kinds of stuff that you guys hated. I thought I was going to get a Man and Machine, like just a nod, just a little bit of a way back playback, but nothing. I hate listening to that entire episode.
So mad.
Yep. I just like the sound of my own voice and apparently my own name. So, but it's been a while, and that's why I'm very, very excited to be back.
Wow, fantastic.
So, and you guys gave me a doozy this time.
Yeah, we're starting a new series this week, the 2018 BBC Two series, The City and the City. Are you familiar with it, either of you? I believe it was a China, I'm going to mispronounce this, Melville novel, perhaps that's how his name is pronounced originally, but now it turned into a 4-episode series.
No, brand spanking new to me. Never heard of it before.
I read the book.
Oh.
I read the book, but it was a few years ago, so it's always interesting to see an adaptation of it because there's parts you're like, yeah, I remember that. And then there's parts I was like, was that in the book or is it just my memory? But what I remember is this overall concept of the show. I remember that really staying with me because it's like such a odd concept to try to grasp to kind of root you in this world.
Seems a very high concept for BBC Two.
Yeah.
Fair enough. It is very high concept, that's for sure. It's a lot to get into. Actually, I was looking at kind of who worked on it. I didn't really recognize a lot of names, but I did see that the person who wrote/adapted the series was a gentleman named Tony Grisoni, I believe is his name. I'm probably mispronouncing it.
That's exactly how that's pronounced. Tony Grisoni is fantastic.
But what was interesting is he was a frequent collaborator with Terry Gilliam, which I think makes sense.
Okay.
Probably a good choice. A man known for his own weird work.
Very intrigued by the concept. How was the book? Would you recommend the book?
Yeah, I liked it. It's funny when Luke said we were going to do this series. It felt when I was reading the book, I thought this is something I feel like Luke would like. And then we talked really briefly about it a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember why, Luke, you hadn't read it, but from what I remember of this book is that it's very high concept, but he has a very particular writing style that it's not so much it's dense, it's it's not the most friendly to a reader, is what I remember. I remember it not being like it's not a beach read, you know?
Okay.
I believe I have tried to read one of his novels before. I believe it was Kraken was the one. I also found that his style of writing to be a difficult entry point. I had trouble getting through that book. I mean, that might speak to my reading level more than anything.
This did remind me quite a bit, or gave me the similar feelings to the Yiddish Policeman's Union.
Oh, I love that book, actually.
Such a good book. Yeah, I kind of wish I was watching an adaptation of that as opposed to this, but just that sort of hard-boiled detective within another genre or an alternate history, that's pretty cool. I've always liked that. A little bit of a, like a dark city.
Yeah.
I'm saying a lot of better things than this, but yeah, those vibes.
Well, let's get into it then. Here's the IMDb summary for episode 1, Basil. When the body of a woman is found in Bulkia Docks, an area that sits on the border between Basel and Alcoma. Oh man, we should pre-warn this to everybody. This is going to be a rough pronunciation episode.
Bejel and Alcoma.
Bejel and Alcoma. Inspector Tidor Borlu notices similarities with an old case that has always haunted him.
It is funny that it was one other thing I was going to say about the book. I'd almost recommend, and after I read it, it's another thing I thought is it's like a book where you're like, maybe I should just have listened to the audiobook, you know? Because the names are so difficult and the places, they have odd names for things. So it's just like, maybe just having a lovely British voice read it to you might be the choice, you know?
Well, this was the first assignment you guys gave me where I could actually just watch it on a television. It's on BritBox. And because I'm at my parents' house currently, I was able to watch it. It just came up with subtitles because they're old. And it made the watching experience 1,000 times easier.
Well, it does open with titles and a bit of an explainer for the show, since it is a pretty high concept series. There are sort of two cities that we've sort of discussed. This Basel and Alcoma. Am I close?
Yep.
Pronunciation. They seem to essentially occupy the exact same physical space, but are invisible to each other. Whether this is a result of just like some sort of multidimensionality, or whether it's just a result of people choosing not to see the other city. Like there's this very strange concept of these two places occupying the same space but not being visible to each other.
But it's even more than that. I think that's the odd thing that you have to wrap your mind around. It's one geographical location that is separated, like you're saying, either through outside forces or through a sort of series of training to not see other people and other things. But it's also, the geography is different, and the languages are different, and the religions are different, and the governments are different. But again, they exist in the same space. And then there's some places, I think they call it cross-hatchings. It's something to that effect. I can't remember the term, where there's places where both sort of exist. And the rest of the world is sort of as we know it, because this is an indeterminate future. But this city exists kind of in itself in terms of how this is set up. It's not like it's the whole world. It's this one specific place.
Yeah. USA, still normal. This place, weird double.
And you say there's an explainer at the beginning of the episode, which is a gross overestimation. There was no explainer whatsoever. When I was starting to watch it, I was like, this show is incredibly blurry. What the hell is going on here?
You know what's funny? It's funny that you had that response, because I felt the same way to Luke. I actually wrote down, I'm like, oh, great, it's explaining everything to people. But maybe that's because I already knew what it was going into things. So I didn't have that feeling. I was like, hey, cool. And then I was like, look at that cool representation. Everything's blurry. I really like it.
I felt the same way. Yeah. I felt the same way. I was just like, oh, cool. What an interesting concept. And like, I love how it's been visualized. Like this idea of these two cities existing simultaneously is done via they use a lot of diopter lenses, so like half the frame will be in focus and half the frame will be out of focus. The idea being like so many shots have to do with like depth of focus, like if they're as if something's hiding in the background that you can't quite make out.
But then they are also playing with time and memory and using that visual language as well. And so there's this double thing going on. I'm sure we'll talk about it in a while about his missing wife. But like just so many layers of sci-fi right off the bat. I had no idea what was going on. So,
but I have to say, I think to either point, I think most people would be interested, at least the visuals. I think it's one of the most interesting ideas how to visualize this very weird concept, which is it's not only done just on the screen for the viewer, but it's almost as if you can almost feel it and see it in the actual characters, because this main character we're going to meet, Inspector Borlo, he's constantly like rubbing his head and his eyes, and he's trying to clearly keep focusing on what he's supposed to be focusing on, because as we're going to learn, it's an actual crime to see people on the other side of the city. So as a police officer, he is the authority in his side of the city, or his city, I guess, and he's trying very hard to always toe the line so that there's no breach.
There's an indication that they've been trained since childhood just to not to see Alcoma. He's in Basel. They don't see Alcoma. A little bit of that lore, I guess, is the cities used to, I guess when they became aware of each other, it resulted in a lot of violence between the two cities in areas that were thinner. And eventually an agency called Breach came into being to deal with unauthorized breaches between the city. A little unclear. They haven't gotten much into Breach at this point. There's some indication that Breach just manifests when someone breaches across, which implies like some sort of like omniscience. I'm not really sure, so I'm sure we'll get to it later in the series. But there just basically is the idea that there's this difference. And just before we get to, obviously, I'm just covering a lot of lore and basics, but like, Jordan, you mentioned sort of different religions, different languages, but visually speaking, there's also a very different visual language between the two cities. Do you guys want to speak to that?
Well, there was even different color schemes, right? I mean, we kind of learned that a little bit later, but not Alcazar, Al Camino,
Alcoma,
the other place. There we go, Alcoma. They're more modern, kind of steel and glass. Red is a big color there, and then in our sort of downtrodden Eastern European, Russian, German mishmash, it's browns and yellow, and mainly gross. Everybody just smokes, just punching darts everywhere.
That is a funny thing that they're all smoking in Beychelle.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good point, though. There is a very almost like East-West German thing happening where you have one side clearly seems like things are a little bit rougher, and they have like all the cars are older. You're right. Everyone's smoking. Everyone seems like their clothes are a little bit older. But they do seem also that they kind of mentioned that there may be a little bit more openness in terms of people, different religions and different cultures, whereas in the Alcoma, where it's clearly a little bit more austere, a little bit cleaner and organized, there's more than a little bit hints of fascism happening. Where and
it's a fascist Apple store.
Yeah, yeah.
I was a little off put because we do get this very sort of Eastern European look to Beychelle, so much so that they have rockstar umlauts over everything. Yeah. Like unnecessary umlauts. There's a sign that says, to keep an eye out for sort of incurrents from the other world, and it has look out for them, and look has double umlauts on both O's. So, but everybody's British. Like, I would have liked some sort of, German or Russian accents to go along with this aesthetic, right?
Well, it is interesting. You're right. Like, it is just British people. Everyone speaks English in Basel. They make some sort of note that at some point traders came at some point and they learned English then. So
right.
That's how it's somehow a dominant language. But when they do, and we won't get to this episode, but when we do eventually get to Alcoma, they actually do speak a completely different language that they hired a linguist to write, which I was like, I just assumed they would just not bother, but they apparently did create a language for it.
Okay. I really would have liked, and I don't know if you guys saw the Pope's Exorcist.
I have, of course.
This guy.
You want Russell Crowe Italian?
100%. Russell Crowe Russian, right? Like, this guy looked like Russell Crowe's stand-in. To have Russell Crowe done, it was four episodes. Like, Russell Crowe could have flown in, and they could have done this in Manchester with him. Like, it would have been amazing.
I have to say, I really like the lead actor in this. It's an actor named David Morrissey, who playing Inspector Bordleau, and I couldn't figure out where I'd seen him before. And I'm sure he's been in a lot of British things, but then I realized the one thing I think I actually know him from, which is Basic Instinct 2.
Wow. Which
is just so you know, not the good one.
I watched the end of that on in a hotel the other day.
Wow.
Did you? I purposely watched the longer version because I was like, there was two options. It was like the unrated version, which I think might just have one more like badly staged sex scene. But I've seen the extended version, and it's not good.
He was in The Walking Dead, right? I think he's quite popular for The Walking Dead. I think he played the mayor in The Walking Dead.
There you go.
Oh, interesting.
But is he one of the dudes from The Vampire Diaries? Does that sound right?
No.
Is that a thing? What was
that? Is a thing, but he's too old.
Is he too old? I thought the Vampire Diaries the one I'm thinking about with Anna Paquin?
WB. It's like a WB teen
show.
No.
What was the old one on like Showcase or HBO?
True Blood?
Or True Blood. Is he one of the True Blood guys?
I don't think so.
That's a different
I don't
dude.
think so either.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, why don't we get into the plot of the series, which kicks off with this Basel police officer, or police inspector Barlow, being teamed up with a uniformed officer named Corey to investigate a murder on a street that is near to one of those hazy kind of crosshatched spaces between the two cities. I believe they were referred to as a disputed zone.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the location, I believe is referred to as Gunterstrasse, is important to Barlow because this is where his wife went missing years ago, possibly moving on to the other world, the other city. But it's never been clear. He never found out what happened to her, and her case was referred to breach because they figured it was an illegal crossing. So in this episode, he's really looking into this murder, and he does not want it to be passive or breach. Very classic cop thing. You don't want the other department to take your case.
And to Steve's point about the two cities, you're getting that concept, and then also they play with time. I think a little bit more in the next episode, but back and forth and his memory and things. I actually really, really liked this in the first episode, how they did this with not really telling you right away if he's remembering things or what's sort of happening. Like his wife will sort of be in a scene and they'll be having a conversation, and then you'll just see him later on in the same room by himself, and you're like, wait a minute, did she leave, or is he imagining it? And they sort of play with that for a few scenes until eventually someone says like, hey, remember when you lost your wife?
Yeah.
Them suck. It was like that sort of thing. But there's one particular scene I thought was great where they just had a shot of a glass with her lipstick on it, and then as the scene went on, he's talking to her stuff, and then he's by himself, and you see the same glass. It doesn't have the lipstick. And it was this sort of playing with, like, maybe in some weird, fantastical way, she is actually there and not, depending on how weird this city is, or if it is, how real her memories. I thought it was a really, really well done scene.
Yeah, and they lay in some plot stuff there too, because she's reading a book that comes into play a little bit later on. Like, I thought that was good, and she's great. She was giving like Marion Ravenwood vibes at the beginning. They got like a nice little rapport in the first scene when they're together. So
Yeah. Her flashbacks, which we don't realize, as you said, right away, really like underlay like a lot of the exposition around the difference between the two cities. Like she has a book that's illegal here about the two cities. They have a movie about the two cities that's also illegal here. They're watching it on a film reel kind of thing. The idea being she's a bit interested in the difference between these two cities. Mm-hmm. But we'll get back to this case for now. Because this dead woman doesn't appear to be from Basel, there's some concern that this is probably a breach. Like we've got a classic like chief at the office who's like, we just got to hand this over to breach. It looks like it's probably a breach. He's like, nah, I'm gonna work on it.
The second in command, the cop that finds the body, says that it was stumbled upon by a gang of baby kids. I wrote that down. Quote, a gang of baby kids. There seems to be
classic baby kid gang.
A discrepancy between the technology and Bezel. Like the cops had, like the CSI guys had full suits on when they found the body, and the police officers had gloves on. They put like nitrile gloves on, but then they just looked at the body, and there was like, "What's that brown stuff?" And he's like, "Brown stuff." Like they had no. It seemed like their technology was sort of all over the place.
I took that more of that they didn't really care so much, that finding a dead body is a kind of common occurrence, and they were just like, I don't know, who cares, dirt. But maybe you're right. Maybe it was a inconsistency. I just took it as they were sort of flippant about it.
The autopsy scene was next, and there were x-rays on the wall, right? But then in the following scene, they're doing a sketch, and the guy's doing it in charcoal. Like
just a sketch artist, a classic sketch artist.
Like a guy on the street outside the Duomo, just like watercolor painting.
He was doing caricatures. He made her with like a really big nose, and she's playing the violin on a skateboard.
Yeah, but it would have been fantastic.
Well, to get into that a little bit, what they've come to find out is that a van dumped the body here. They have sort of video footage of it. And the owner, of course, they track him down. He's like, oh, it was stolen. It's not my fault. I wasn't involved. But he has papers that allows him to travel between the two cities because his job is, and you talked about technology here, he's part of a group of scavengers who will go over and kind of dig through Oklahoma garbage to find knickknacks or paraphernalia or just like media and stuff and like bring it back to Basel because they kind of have better stuff over there, and to the point he can sell their garbage on the other side in Basel.
Could you imagine the migraines these like garbage pickers must have going back and forth to these places? Like just looking at the reaction from our main character, where he's just like, "Oh my head! Oh, I can't see these things." And these guys have to go back and forth like seemingly every day. Must just be spinning.
Low quality of life job.
Yeah.
And of course, in this investigation, Barlow ends up at home and he gets a call, and that call is from Oklahoma. It's unusual. Usually, I guess they don't call between the two cities very often. It's a phone call from a friend of the dead woman who's able to like say, hey, she's not from there, she's from here. She's seen the missing posters popping up around Oklahoma, which is a problem because apparently those shouldn't be visible across the two lines. There's like a question of like why these missing posters are appearing outside of Basel when they shouldn't be. But essentially, she's able to learn that the dead woman is actually an American grad student. She was in Oklahoma studying. This woman calling is also an American. She was friends with hers. And this is one of the times when Barlow kind of has his headaches. He opens the window out and looks into his street, and he can kind of see past the crosshatching into Oklahoma and see this woman basically calling from a payphone outside his house, but in the other city.
So if I'm in America and I get on a plane, can I go to either country?
I believe so.
Like, do they have tourism boards for both countries? And I fly into one airport on one side. Like, where's the entry point?
I think the problem with sometimes, I mean, this is getting maybe slightly off topic, but I think the issue with these sort of really, really high concept sort of stories is that if you think about it too much and you get into the nitty gritty of it, it does start to fall apart because there's lots of things you can start like, you know, how would you even really know what side of someone, like if you cross the street, are they still invisible or like, do you know what I mean? Like there's, it starts getting murky, but I think you have to just sort of like either buy in or buy not, or not buy in and just not think about too much of like the borders and stuff.
But they bring it in because they made her an American student, right?
Well, they deal with this. They deal with that exact thought in this episode when her parents come to identify the body from America.
Yeah.
And usually there's a 2-week tourist kind of crash course you have to take before you're allowed to enter either city to sort of like accustomize your mind to living in this world. And they have to waive that for the parents who play like the ugliest Americans you've ever met. They arrive and they're just like, well, you have to understand, like here it's very complicated. Like that, there's 2 cities, you have to be very careful. And they're just like, fuck you, I'm American. I don't do what I want. I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah, then the dad like crashed 2 beers together like Stone Cold Steve Austin and just poured them over and drank them. And we're like, America.
Yeah. But they do kind of mention that to come visit these cities does require a bit of like, there's a bit of a tourist visa and a bit of like a 2 weeks worth of training you have to go through before you're even allowed to enter the cities. So there is an indication that there is like, it's a complicated place to be, and tourism is maybe not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the case. In sort of this world, there are activists who are sort of protesting for the reunification of Basel and Oklahoma. I guess there's this idea that they could somehow combine these cities. I don't know. There's sort of a left-wing or a fringe group that is pretty politically persecuted because the political bodies are just like, fine the way it is. I believe someone says that the protesters don't understand that the 2 cities love to hate each other. They're never gonna get along. Like this is part of like how the system works. Is they're perpetually at war with each other, or at least in conflict with each other. And what we see is Barlow, he arrests one of the protesters when he walks past this past this protest for the reunification because he sees some breach agents checking him out. He kind of has I'm not sure exactly how he suspects this, but he's like, I'm going to bring this guy in. I think it might be related to my case. And they're basically able to interview this guy, and the guy has met the dead woman. She came over and contacted his group, but even his fringe group of like activists, her ideas were too dangerous for them even, so they were like, they really didn't have much to do with her.
And the case goes on. Yeah, the hard-boiled case. By the way, I'll just say I was super biased because I love any sort of like noir, neo-noir, any sort of detective who's like, he's like, you know, he didn't have time for a shower and everyone's bothering him and he just married to his job, and I'm like, yes, sold in. You know, so it's I'm an easy audience for this sort of thing.
I just like the radical punk. I guess he was some sort of punk.
Yeah.
He just had just lines all over his face, just Sharpie lines, like not exactly a symbol, not a pattern, just weird lines all over, and a white guy dreads, which were questionable.
So you know he's a real punk.
Yeah.
But this is sort of the crossover of this episode, is that like this fringe group who wants to reunify the two cities, they didn't have anything to do with this dead woman because her ideas were so crazy. And then when they interview her parents, when they come from America, her parents are like, well, yeah, our daughter was upset because these true citizens, she was upsetting them in your city. And the true citizens, we come to learn, are a sort of, on the opposite side of the political spectrum, a far-right skinhead amalgam, which they want to sever all ties between the two cities and also toss out all immigrants.
I like that they slightly adjusted the swastika. Slightly.
Did they? I didn't even notice.
Yeah, they have a couple of them. Like, you can see when the one guy's playing pool, you'll see, like, what is essentially a swastika. Another guy has it on his head. But it's, like, not a progressive cross anymore. It's more like almost a... looks almost more like a medieval sort of cross, but adjusted slightly. But I think the idea still is, you know, if you're putting it on your head, you're maybe not be a cool guy to have a drink with.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah, you get the idea.
They were not subtle. I believe one of the lines was Bezel jobs for Bezel workers. Like, they're little on the nose.
Short, punchy.
Well, when the guy was making the speech, though, the audience was really eating it up. Like, he knew who his audience was.
Oh, yeah.
He was like, immigrants, am I right? And they're like, "Rah!" And I was like, well, he gave him what he wanted.
This scene has one of the best shots in the episode, though.
Oh, that's next episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, this essentially is one long big episode. So
yeah,
I have the same thing.
It's serialized.
You forget what happens in what episode because it's just like the characters walking in and out of rooms. I'm like, when did he do that?
We'll get to it. I'll get us back on.
He's not in the Nazi bar here.
No,
You're just
that's
introducing
next
us to
episode.
the political
concept.
I see. I got you. My
Steve,
apologies.
again,
Yeah.
they're not Nazis. They've changed the swastika slightly.
That's
so,
right, yes.
Just saying.
Nazi adjacent.
Yeah.
What this is that, like, she has met with these protesters, these activists. She's apparently in conflict with these true citizens, this far right group. Essentially, all signs are pointing toward a breach. And Barlow's boss is just like, hey man, that's it, we're done. We got to pass it over to breach. There's just no way this wasn't some sort of breach.
I like, by the way, that that breach is a thing and the organization is breach. Like, it should really be like the breachers who handle breach because it gets confusing for everyone.
Breach can mean it's a real all-encompassing word. It's a noun, it's an adjective.
Yeah, exactly.
It does it all. At any rate, Barlow has to basically give in. He's just like, I don't agree. I don't believe it's a breach case. If it was a breach case, then breach would have automatically manifested. But like his superiors made up his mind, so that's fine. They head down to Capolo Hall, which is this like large building, big bureaucratic old style building that I guess is neutral territory between the two cities. And when we see it, like half of it's blurred out, like the idea being it like crosses, it lives between the two cities essentially. And it's where it's got basically an oversight committee between the two cities happens in it, where we've got politicians from both sides. And they basically go to present the case to them in order to make a case to transfer the murder to breach, essentially. We obviously, this is where we get to see a bit of the political tensions between the two cities. There's some questions around whether Basel has autonomy, whether Oklahoma forces their will upon them. But the partner in the series, which we haven't talked much about, but Officer Corwee, she secured a CCTV tape from the border crossing, and so Barlow's able to do that classic thing where you show some new evidence suddenly in the middle of this investigation, which is like seemingly just to pass the case for the breach. But the video footage shows the van with the body in it legally crossing the border twice because it has travel papers. So that explains how the body got back and forth, implying this isn't a breach case, which means that Barlow gets to keep the case because they don't want to lose Basil autonomy and hand it over to breach. I don't know. There's a political thing going on here. I like this scene, but it is very complicated.
I did too. It was a real My Cousin Vinny scene. I was like, yeah, home run.
We should give all credit to his mad dog partner here. All 4'2" of her.
Yeah.
Comes in just swearing up a storm in an earlier scene. So much so that he has to tell her to tone it down a little bit. Like, we're still on the BBC here. Like, a couple fucks is enough.
I do like that actor and that character too. I wish there was more of Corway. She's just like so much trouble.
Yeah, she is immediately obsessed with him, like in love with him, and also hates him. She's so passionate.
It's good that you bring it up because I think the two of them, it's like we've seen it a million times on these shows, good or bad, that it's like they're a little bit opposite. One's country, one's a little rock and roll. But I think they play well together, and I think to Luke's point, it's good to have more of her because when you do have the slightly broken, damaged detective, it can be a little bit ponderous if it's just him walking around drinking and then staring out at the city. You need someone to come in and bleep bloop bloop every 5 seconds.
Right. And she can ask the questions that we have, right? Like
yes, exactly.
She seems a little less, not naive, but like a little less international per se in terms of these two cities. He's been back and forth a little bit. He's a little bit more weathered, and so she can ask those sort of questions and do the digging that gets him exactly what he wants.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fun character that I could spend more time with, and hopefully we will over the series. But this sort of gets us closer to the end of this episode in that, like, that night after he gets to keep the case, the American dad, he sneaks out of his hotel with the intention to breach into Olcoma because he wants to go speak to the people his daughter knew at the university. He's going to do his own little bit of investigating into what happened to his daughter. So he does head down to Gunterstrasse, where there's a weaker crossover, and he does breach between the two cities. And as soon as he breaches, though, it's absolutely some hand just reaches out from behind him and jams the needle directly into his neck.
Yeah, which is good because we had mentioned it that they keep saying they manifest, they just show up, and you're not quite sure, is this like a KGB thing where they're operating at night and creating this sort of terror and creating the image of this mystical thing, or is it actually that? Like, if you do the wrong thing, do these things actually quote unquote manifest? Because that's how it seems. He comes in and like he's there to say 30 seconds is generous before they grab him.
Absolutely.
It is interesting, right? Like we assume everything is on planet Earth type. I don't want to get into like aliens, all that, but again, these guys, they literally say manifest, right? Like they just show up.
Yeah.
Are they? I have secret police in my notes, but that might not be an accurate representation of these guys, right? They definitely operate in that way. They're following him at one point. They're kind of trench coated and all that jazz, but like, are they human? Are they living outside of time or reality? They operate in both cities. It kind of reminded me of Fringe. I don't know if you guys saw that series, right? With those like watchers or whatever, like they exist sort of beyond our understanding. So, but also they're a government body. They can like recommend it to breach. So
I got an unrelated question. What if you're one of these people and you're walking around with the little syringe? How often do you think they accidentally like jab themselves?
It's like an EpiPen nowadays. You got to flip the cap and then you can just go to town.
They must have like a little cork, like a cartoon, right?
Yeah.
You like to imagine them with just loose syringes running around the city.
Yeah. Well, it's like they're ready to go because I didn't see the guy pull it out of his container and stick it in something and pull up the juice or whatever. He was ready to go. So my feeling is it's a loose syringe in his pocket, and he's always saying to his friends like before he goes, okay guys, before we go out, remember I got a loose syringe in my pocket. So like, don't hug me, don't get too excited about things because this thing could poke anyone.
He's digging around for change and he jabs himself.
Exactly.
I would just like to say that the dad is an actor from The Mummy. I don't know if you guys recognized him. He's one of the.
I did not.
He plays a brash American in The Mummy. He's been playing the same character.
What a funny typecast, huh?
Yeah.
They're like, hey, you're in casting. You're like, I know just the guy to be obnoxious, and he comes in. They're like, nailed it. He's perfect.
But yes, this is the one mystery that closes out this episode. The other mystery that comes in is when Barlow goes home again, he gets another call from Olcoma. This one's expected. It's a call from the professor of the dead woman. The professor kind of fills him in that the dead woman has been sort of following the work of a professor over in Olcoma who has a history of like seducing his students, not just intellectually, but also physically. A man named David Barlow. And Barlow has a controversial theory, and it's illegal in Basel, that there's a third city that exists between Basel and Olcoma, a city called Orsini. And this sort of establishes the like second mystery of the series is just like, is there a city that lives between the two cities? And of course, this triggers a memory of his missing wife, who is also a follower of Barlow, and also, as we'll come to learn, his former lover too. This Barlow guy, he really has a thing for his students.
I'm pretty sure it's Bowden, by the way.
Yes.
Bowden?
I think it's Bowden.
Because they call them Bowdenites. His followers.
My mistake.
His followers.
It's
are
okay. You're
Bowdenites.
mixing up with Borlu, and it's a good point that I'll say one thing about this. These are terrible names. They're terrible names to remember.
It's tough.
Like I
It's
literally
tough for sure.
on the top of my notes, I have the cast, so I can keep going up while I'm writing my notes. I'm like, right. It's Major Theater, and he's having a conversation with Commissioner Gadlam as they're talking to Elizabeth Corwai. It's like, oh, this is too hard, guys. Make it like Johnny Six and Sandra Vavu or something. I don't know.
Well, even his wife's name, like, I thought it was Katrina, but it's Katrina.
It's Katrinia.
Katrinia. And it's like,
Yeah.
what? Unnecessary syllable, guys.
Yeah.
And the third city is called Ore City. It's like
Orson,
but it's
Orsini,
but it sounds like Ore
Orsini.
City. Like it's like this
Orsini.
one, or the third one, Ore City.
Well, I think you can see, Steve, why we had trouble getting through the books.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of language use. I mean, I think that's why his books are so loved. He loves to play with the language, but it does make for a difficult way of talking about things.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, we learn about Orsini. That's the other mystery, and we kind of basically end on the episode is he glimpses out his window. He sees into Olcoma again and sees that like friend of the friend of the dead woman Yolanda who had called him earlier, and it's just like at the end of the first episode, all signs point to Olcoma. We know, hey, next episode, I bet we go to Olcoma.
Also, what a terrible location for his apartment, huh? He's right at the edge. So he has to, like, at all times look out his window and see the border and try not to see the border. Like, I'd be like, close that window and look out a different one.
Do you think he is at the border? My assumption was that, like, the case is making him see over, and it's, like, not really a full border.
Oh, maybe you're right.
there.
No, I assumed he was right at the border, but that's probably a more nuanced take.
So I think we need to establish this, because originally I thought, like, okay, we've got some sort of splitting of the atom here, multiverse. People are literally occupying the exact same space. That's not the case.
I don't think they are, no. And I'll say this, in the book, I'm pretty sure, and someone who remembers the book better than I do because it's been a few years, it's like people, like, you have to, like, learn how to not bump into people.
Right.
And when you're driving, like, they've created the road so you're not driving into each other because you don't see it. So it's like that scene that I think is actually going to happen in the next episode where a toy kind of flies in.
Yeah.
Like, that's sort of an odd thing because you wouldn't even notice it because it's all about a training. Like, how realistic is it? Could we train ourselves to just see people, to our right? It's pretty impossible. But for the sake of this, I think that's the argument that they're making. But maybe to your larger point, maybe it is something else. Maybe there's more to it.
Well, I don't think so, because actually there's a scene with his police chief where he puts up an overhead projection of their city, and then
Olcoma and Basil.
thank you, right over top of it, and they sort of line up perfectly, right? So they're not nested on top of each other. They do literally border each other. So one side of the road is in this place, and the other side of the road is in the other place, and they don't.
Yeah, they're interlocked.
Yes.
But
So yeah, I think there is a border outside of his window. It might only run for that little block,
Could
like
be.
that half of the piazza there, right? But like he can literally look out. He's not supposed to. That would be breaking the law. Like every time he sees that little girl, he's breaking the law.
Like the real estate agent probably said that to him. They're like, so you look out this window, you could see both Bayshell and Alcoma. Now don't look at it. Don't look out the window. But like the other one's a beautiful view.
Right.
Well, it does appear there is, like, we do get a scene where he's on the subway or transit at some point, and, like, everyone's coming along, and they sort of start coming through the tunnel, and there's, like, an announcement to, like, avert your eyes, and everyone kind of just stares at the ground as they pass through, and it gets very bright, and then, like, they go back in the tunnel, and it gets dark again, and you're like, and they kind of can come back to looking. So, like, I think you might be right. There's, like, areas you just can't look.
Okay, that's what that was. Yeah, they're on the train and it just goes Alcoma, 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 and I'm like, I thought they were kind of, passing them through it, right? But I
think that's the idea. I think they were sort of passing through it, sort of.
right,
thing. Yeah.
yeah. If they had said "don't look," right? Because there's a lot of talking about like when in Basil, see Basil, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, if they said now entering Alcoma, don't look. Just dumb it down a little bit for us. Don't be so high concept. That would
It's a good point, and I think how much you like this might depend a little bit on how much you want this explained and not explained. And this first episode goes sort of halfway. Like we didn't even talk about, like, there's a voiceover in this. There's narration that explains a few things, but they do leave. There is a lot of subtlety, and there's a lot of things that are still left to the viewer to kind of put together, despite all everything that they're pointing out.
Yeah, it's almost a good water cooler television conversation, because just in talking with you guys, it's like, I see that now. I see how you could have read it this way, right, and understood it a bit clearer than I do. So in a way, it's a little bit of a success that way. So
Well, let's move on. Let's get into the next episode. Here's the IMDb summary for episode 2, Olcoma.
Your orientation is a complete Olcoman immersion course, designed to initiate a Belge citizen into actually being in Olcoma. Each day, we'll take a different cross-hatched area of the city and train you to see the buildings and people that have been right by your side all this time and unsee everything you know.
After trying to cross into Olcoma, Mr. Geary is seized by Breach and deported back to America. Barlow thinks the nationalist True Citizens are linked to Malaya's death. Malaya's? I don't know. Shut up, Luke. The case is handed over to the Olcoma militia. Militia?
Wasn't it horrible? Wasn't it horrible when we saw the dad take it away in like a oxygen tank stretcher thing? I was like, ooh, they might have injected too much into him.
He was wrapped like luggage. It was just saran wrap around him. You could see the seams. It was great.
It was like in a gurney, saran wrapped into it with an oxygen. And he was like, I was just like, oh man, they breached him hard when he went over.
They did breach him hard.
He looked prone too, like not on his back, like hog-tied with butt in the air. It was very weird.
There was also a funny edit because the wife, when she first sees him, because it's like the beginning of this episode, he gets taken away and it's in front of everyone. And she's like, no, like, what did you do to him? Ah. And then there's another scene, they're walking and she's just having a casual conversation again. She's just like, anyways, blah, blah. I was like, whoa, she got over that real quick.
It was quite the opening where I'm just like, well, I guess that's what happens when you get breached. That's looks bad. But we get kind of back into it, and this is the scene you were thinking of, Stephen, is Barlow follows up on the tip that the True Citizens may have had a problem or a beef with that dead woman. So he goes to a true citizen rally where a politician, Major Sider, I believe his name is.
Syader. They make everything a little bit harder. It's Syader.
This is perfect for me because you just add extra syllables.
Yeah,
which I do just naturally when I'm trying to read a foreign language. So these names are perfect.
He's holding court. He's giving this big speech to his skinhead followers. They're loving it.
Yeah.
And he was one of the guys on the oversight committee who gave Barlow the case back because he does not like Olcoma and did not want to see it get handed over to Breach. But he's not. They don't get along still. Like Sidar, I can't pronounce his name. He isn't very helpful now that Barlow's asking him about like, hey, do you think the True Citizens had anything to do with this woman's death? He's just like, well, I'm not gonna help you with that. These are my people. It's not gonna happen. And the craziest thing happens is one of the skinheads takes exception to Barlow, hits him in the head with a pool ball.
Yeah.
And like a Warner Brothers cartoon, we get a shot of Barlow falling over with like pool balls, 8 balls spinning around his head like birdies. And I was like, whoa. What is happening?
It was, I'll say, I probably on an opposite end of you guys, I actually really enjoyed it. I think they went for a visual and they're like, we're going for it. Like there's the idea that he get clocked and they're like, how can we show this in the most visually wild way possible? They're like, what if the balls were spinning around him as the camera pulls out and zooms in and he's falling into the ground like it's like he's getting swallowed by it. I was like, perfect. Yeah. I loved it.
It's a weird choice. I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't hate it. It was just shocking. Like it was a bold choice. It
was the first of two. Like, and they didn't really do anything in the first episode. Although I'll say, I love the visuals of this. I think they're great. This episode has 2 shots like this where they were like, we're going for it. It was this, and then later on when he's in a place we'll talk about and he falls as well. It's the same sort of thing where like they make it to be a very dramatic moment visually.
It's a really big swing because then they go into the hard-boiled thing a second later.
Yes.
Because he talks about how like every so often since his wife has been missing, an amazing trope.
Yeah.
That like
I love it.
He likes to get beaten up so every so often. Right? But it
just to feel a little something.
Well, I'll tell you, if I could watch 100 movies in a row of like a hard-boiled detective who's down on his luck, who goes and gets beaten up a little bit, and he's like, I deserved it because I'm a piece of crap. I'd be like, yes, one more time.
But he says it makes him sharper. He's like, it makes me sharper.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Like, you just took a pool ball or a cue ball to the head. Actually,
he's sharper, my friend.
Ball.
He's sharper.
And you are sharper? I don't think so.
Also, I'm just gonna say this. I feel like maybe the neo-Nazi, although I'll point out again, it's not quite the swastika. He seems like he might be a little bit of a rash individual. Like he didn't even take time to talk about their differences, which was I was a little disappointed in the almost Nazi.
Yeah, not like a normal right wing Nazi.
He had his little sharp haircut and his suspenders. I was like, I don't think this is a guy you want to have an argument with.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, as you said, Barlow's a little worse for the wear, but also sharper somehow.
Yeah.
And he basically he's gonna keep working the case. He goes to his boss and he's just like, hey, I gotta stay on this. Send me to Olcoma. And he's like, all right, we'll send you over there, but partly for plot and partly as a supervisor, you're going to go to Alcoma as a treat.
Yeah.
Which is great because, we all want to go there now. We spent a whole episode in Basel. Let's get to Alcoma. And this unlocks this episode's sort of flashbacks. Obviously, that's the structure of the show's stuff happening here and stuff happening in a flashback. Talk quickly about the flashbacks, I guess. What we're seeing is how Barlow met his wife back at the time. And what we see is a little bit of the tourist immersion thing. They go through kind of what it takes to learn to travel to Alcoma, learning to see Alcoma in this kind of like training session.
You've missed one very, very important thing about the flashback, though, Luke.
No beard?
There you go. No beard.
He's got no beard now.
I was like, I could tell it's the past because if there's anything that happens, if you've gone through a traumatic event, you grow out a beard.
Yeah. And this is where it's actually a really nuanced sort of Eastern European Cold War type thing because it's this whole training center for all ages because they even have kids playing like almost like a hopscotch game, but if you jump out of the lines, then they call breach on you. But they call it the tourist training, right? It's like very subtle and, downplaying what it really is, right? Because if you look the wrong way, they will breach you and saran wrap you in front of your wife, right? So it's...
Yeah. Who, to be fair, will be fine with it 30 seconds later.
That's right. She's into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of the feeling of this place, this training center to prepare people who are going to travel to Alcoma to be able to see Alcoma. And we get to meet kind of who they were in the past. Barlow, at this point in his life, was on the Extreme Crime Squad.
Oh, isn't that the best? To be fair, those are the best kind of crimes. There are a lot of surfing accidents, a lot of skateboarding accidents.
Well, he does say what his job is that like if there's a shooting in Alcoma, often the bullets will fly into Basel, and he has to deal with kind of those cross city like incidents like that.
I also like anytime someone has to do like intensive training, they put those little sticky suction cup things on people's heads. That's important. That's the first thing you need to know. It's not serious unless they put those little suction cups on your head.
And his wife, we learned, was a philosophical archaeologist.
They're the most annoying type, I think.
They exclusively work for the History Channel nowadays.
And she was, of course, working with the fringe scientist Bowden. Is that what we just said his name is? Bowden?
Yes.
Bowden.
Yeah.
Bowden. And she was obviously interested in this third city stuff, the Orsini stuff, and she was specifically going to Alcoma because they were looking at, I think what we see is they go to a museum together and we see them looking at an artifact covered in glyphs made of an unknown material that the Alcomas claim is from their history. But their research is around just like, this doesn't seem to actually be from Alcoma. It seems to be from somewhere else. Maybe Orsini. Is this the Mystery City?
And there's something about this I actually really liked, other than I like that they came up with like a sort of, I don't want to say hieroglyphics, but something like that. Like there's images on the wall that you're not quite sure. Are they alien? Are they ancient? Are they a different language that doesn't exist anymore? But there was this idea, though, that Alcoma is sort of going out of their way to not only find a history, but also maybe to create a history, as a lot of places do, where you think about something like Yugoslavia after the communism fell and the country broke apart. Everyone had a sort of claim to the geography, right? The Serbs were like, well, we were in charge in 1500. And the Croats said, well, we were in charge in 1300. The Turks were like, I think you guys forgot about 987. And it's like, and they're all right and they're all wrong. But there is, to create a nationalism or to create an identity or a culture, you have to sort of have a through line. And I thought that was done very well of this. Well, we have archaeologists digging up stuff to show we're the true people here, and I thought that was a really interesting idea.
So much so that they call it the Ark.
Yeah.
Right? It's the Ark of
Alcoma.
Alcazir. Yeah. It's because it was spelt with a Q in the subtitles. It breaks my brain every time to try and say Alcoma when it was spelled Quoma, at least in my subtitles. Alcoma. Yeah. I've got it.
No, that's how it's spelled for sure.
Okay.
It's a lot.
I think it's UL and then space QOMA. Alcoma.
Oh, right. Yeah, not even AL, Alcoma. It's Alcoma. Ridiculous.
Yeah.
You just came back from Europe. You know how hard it is to speak. At any rate, the end of this flashback kind of concludes with their eventual like full on meet cute. Barlow witnesses his future missing wife breaking up with this Bowden, this fringe scientist archaeologist who sleeps with all his students. Once again, he has here, but he's breaking up with her.
To be fair, he's got tousled hair.
That's true.
And he's got a real like devil may care attitude. So like you try not to sleep with him.
He's a good looking dude. Like I can see it.
Barlow, of course, follows a distraught woman out into the street as she runs away from this breakup, and he witnesses her attempting suicide in the river, jumps in, saves her life, and I'm just like, oof, what rough start.
Was she attempting suicide, though?
Unclear. You're right. It's not clear.
She goes behind like a pylon. Not like an orange pylon, but like a building pylon. A strut. And we don't see whether she's pushed off or jumps off.
That's true.
Yeah, you see that she's there, and we know that she's in distress at the very least, and she's had an emotional situation happen. She does fall into the water, and if there's a better meet cute than saving someone who's fallen off a bridge, I can't think of one. And he pulls her out of the water, and it's kismet.
But that sort of is the flashback of this episode. It's the idea like how he met his wife, how his wife's connected to this Bowden woman, and how he can see into a coma more easily than others because he's been previously trained for this work. Which gets us back to the plot at hand. Barlow crosses the border to the more advanced and as we've mentioned, seemingly more fascist Alcoma, where it's more fascist, but you cannot smoke. You have to vape. Only vapes.
I did like that they had a vaping digital cigar. That gave me a good chuckle.
A massive vape, like a highlighter-sized vape.
Well, it's because you still want to have that feeling of holding a big old stogie.
Yeah. Before he heads to Alcoma, I have to say, he is torn a new one by his bulldog of a partner. Who,
oh, that's true.
is so abusive to him the second she finds out that he's leaving and has potentially a new partner. Calls the new partner a bitch 6 or 7 times.
She's heard
She's
things.
very upset to be taken off the case.
So mad about it.
He assures her, though, you're still on the case, just unofficially. She's like, great, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I'm good.
She's like, I'm still going to be working on it, but not getting paid, right? And he's like, absolutely. She's like, perfect. Perfect.
But you're right. In Alcoma, he's teamed with a new partner, Detective Dot, who's from the Alcoma Militia. I guess their police force is it's like militaristic, I suppose, is the idea.
And you can see that in their uniforms, right? Like the uniforms of the police over in Bayshell are a little bit more like you would assume in sort of Western Europe, and these are a little bit more Eastern Europe, shall we say. They're a little bit more dark. They're darker. They're a little bit more streamlined. And everyone, there's not as much detail. They look more militaristic.
And they start the investigation, essentially. They try to find the friend Yolanda who called Borloo from Alcoma to mention about the dead woman. She's gone missing now. We see a brief tour of the junk scavengers who come over from Basel. They visit an archaeological dig in the center of the city the university runs. And kind of give a little bit of a walkthrough of that. But basically, they don't learn anything for the first little bit of this investigation. Like, they kind of just get a tour of Alcoma for the most part, and some of the key locations we'll go to. But when Barlow gets back to his hotel that night, one of the students from the archaeological dig shows up and essentially starts talking to him about what's happening at the university. The dead girl was, in fact, dating Bowden, and he had just broken up with her. So, again, Bowden's sticking to his normal MO. And then, of course, there's a closed-off section of the archaeological dig where they only allow foreign students to work in. No one from Alcoma, no Alcoman students are allowed in this closed-off section, which they're told is unstable. Like when they originally visit, they're like, oh, you can't go in there, it's unstable. But in reality, they're actually pulling artifacts out of there all the time. It's just they don't let Alcoma people look at them immediately until they can claim them as their own. So, it establishes something weird going at the dig. So this student helps Barlow break in after midnight to this archaeological dig. And when they go in there, it's a cave full of those glyphs we saw in the artifact. Like, they're all over the walls, they're all over the ceilings. It's quite strange. And the girl, or the woman who's the university student, she's able to translate them, sort of saying they're kind of an invitation or like a warning that Orsini will find you. It's a little unclear. Like, it seems to be some sort of welcome, but also some sort of warning, like we'll find you or something.
It's unclear, but it seems not only connected to this disappearance, but also connected in some weird way to this concept of Orsini and this book that this Bowden wrote, and that also connected to his wife, because I don't know if we've mentioned that when he, in the first episode, at one point he pulls up floorboard and finds this book that's apparently I think, I don't know if it's outright banned, but it's not in publication anymore because it's a little bit dangerous. And when he opens it up, there's a picture of his wife and Bowden in it, so he knows there's this whole connection. And I think whether there is or not, he seems to has already maybe decided that he will be able to, through this investigation, find out something more about his wife. And I don't know if it's he's pushing it like my wife's definitely connected with this as an excuse to look into it, or he's just seeing what he wants to see.
I think subtextually we know his wife is heavily involved in his pushing of this case.
Yeah, and clearly he's never given up the hunt for his wife, right? He doesn't believe that she's dead or that the breach has taken her. Like he thinks she's out there.
Of course. I mean, he's grown a beard.
But as they're looking at this cave with these artifacts, these glyphs like the Ark has, security catches them. Barlow is knocked off the side of a wall, basically falling further into the pit of this archaeological dig. And this is what you're talking about. As he falls, it goes slow motion. The roof, he starts catching a glimpse of something between the glyphs on the ceiling. He's kind of like getting this like weird vision as he sort of crashes to the floor, leaving us on a cliffhanger for the episode.
Now, if they really wanted to push it, he would have had 8 balls going around his head again. Right, that's visual.
Well, he got hit by a gun, so he should have had little guns going.
It's what he sees. He's like Roger Rabbit. He can't do tweeting birds. He only sees 8 balls.
Oh, so it was just a coincidence that 8 ball hit him the first time.
Or it's just broken his brain. So now that any time he gets hit, it's like a concussion syndrome. It just has 8 balls.
Okay.
Around.
I love it. Why didn't they do that?
Or have a magic 8 ball on his desk. Like, let's do some world building here, guys. Come on. BBC 2, let's get it together.
Yeah, what this show needs is some world building.
That's what it's missing, really.
Yeah. I did like the Lisbeth Salander type archaeologist that gives him the inside info.
She smokes. She's one of the few people who smokes.
Yeah, during the dig. Like,
she's like, light me up.
Imagine Jurassic Park if Alan Grant was just rocking a dart while he was brushing away, like, on the bones of the dinosaurs. Like,
the rest of the people don't like working with her. She's there smoking with her hip haircut, and she's just being sarcastic, and you're like, can you just file those things? And she's like, no.
Now, are they a utopia? Because she implied that the drinks were free at the bar. Was it just because she's an attractive woman and drinks are free for her, or was she saying that, like...
I'm not sure. I actually caught that too. There was a weird a dialogue, and I didn't know if they were being sarcastic or what it was, but he's like, oh, get a drink. And she's like, well, they're free. And he's like, well, it's on me anyway. And I was like, well, what was that about?
Mm-hmm.
There is an indication of a semi-utopia amidst the fascism, because they also, like, she offers him at some point, his partner offers him, like, a drug that is, like, will, like, hype him up. Or, like, there seems to be, like, speed readily available. Like, there's, like, a lot of things where it's just, like, yeah, you can kind of have anything you want here. You just can't do certain things, like be an immigrant.
Well, or don't wear yellow.
The taxi driver that he gets in Alcoma is like, oh, yeah, I had to spend a year in the camps and then 2 years learning to be an Alcoman citizen. And he's like, well, why didn't you just come to Basel? And the taxi driver's like, well, what's in Basel? Right? So there's clearly a reason to stay in Alcoma or go to Alcoma, other than just to be
they have all those Apple products.
Philosophical archaeologist.
Philosophical archaeologist, my God. All right, any final notes before we get into ratings?
Did we mention that, A, he has a beard, and 2, that it wasn't quite a swastika?
Covered your main points.
That's
for
it.
The episode.
I'm good then.
I think, there's a little bit of maybe a disservice to the book here, the original material, that it is only 4 episodes, because it's not bad. I don't want to get ahead of the ratings, but like it's got a bit of like Minority Report vibes to it, right? Like a broken husband, somebody's lost, they're on the hunt for it, and it's in this amazing world. And it almost would be nice to see a little bit more of the world itself, a little bit more of his partner's life. What's her home life like? They go for tea, or he goes for tea at one point, and there's this smash up of cultures, right? She makes note of somebody liking gefilte fish and somebody here doing this, and it's just like, I'd stay in this world for another couple episodes.
It is interesting. I think you're right, because I think they've got it boiled down to like a 4 episode conclusion to it. But I was also the same thing. I'm just like, oh, you know what? You could potentially build a series in it, but maybe they're right to keep it short because it's such a complicated world. You maybe don't want to spend too much time poking at the seams of it. But I don't disagree. I'm like I'd see more about people who live here and how that works. Like I would see more of this world too. But yeah, why don't we get into ratings then? Steve, first episode, Basil. How are you feeling? Out of 10 stars.
Out of 10 stars. Wow. Okay. I'm just thinking, just episode 1, because they do kind of bleed into each other.
It sort of ends with the American getting breached.
Would you say they sort of bleed into each other like Bayshell and Alcoma bleed into each other?
just blurred on the edges?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say kind of better than average. So I go like 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10.
Yeah.
Jordan, how did you feel about the first episode?
Disagree. I absolutely loved it. It was maybe my favorite thing I've seen on this podcast in quite some time. 9 out of 10.
Wow.
I loved it. And I'll say with an asterisk, I watched it at 3 a.m.
Well, I'll say this. It is actually a full hour long, these episodes. They're longer than we usually watch. It's quite a lot. One of the easiest watches we've ever had for this. That pilot had me hooked. It's everything I could want. I really liked it. I'm going to go full 10.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That pilot, I was just like, I could watch this all day long.
Yeah,
I don't know what's
great.
going on.
Yeah.
I love the way it's shot, the blurriness. Jordan, and to your point, I think they took a hard-boiled, like, classic detective and shoved them into this weird world. I'm like, great, let's go. I'm on board.
Yeah, me too. I'm only holding out because I want another episode to be a 10. That's why I'm giving it a 9.
Right. I don't watch a lot of bad television like you guys do professionally, so I guess I had, like, not higher expectations, especially not for this podcast, but just, like, that's my standard TV rating, 6 out of 10. For this podcast, yeah.
Well, Steve, watching bad TV is our duty and our penance. Thank you.
All right, what about Alcoma, the second episode, Steve?
Okay, so this is where, like, my rating goes up, frankly, because that guy gets saran wrapped in the very first scene. And this is where the umlauts start to show up, and the partner just rips him a new one. So I'm going up to 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Interesting. And Jordan, Alcoma, how are you feeling about the second episode?
I'm going down slightly only because I don't know why. It's like as Steve mentioned, it's essentially an extension of the first episode. But I think I just love the setup. So anything after that, I'll be slightly let down just because I'm like, I just want it to be set up and just watch him do cases. So I'm going to drop us slightly to 8.5.
8.5. I'm also going to come down. I think the second episode, I was excited to go to Alcoma, but I found it less. I just felt like it was more wheel spinning and meat gristy. I just didn't get I wasn't not as excited. Like it wasn't as much information, not new information. It was okay, but I just didn't. And we lost a lot of the partner. We didn't get to see as much of the partner. I'm going to go to an 8. I dropped mine down to 8.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm definitely going to watch the last 2 episodes. I mean, if this was a 22-episode season, I wouldn't do it, but 2 more hours.
I know, 2 more episodes? How can you not?
I even thought about getting the book because I'm interested to see both takes on this story because it is rather interesting.
You want to see the backstory to Quasima Dat and Professor Mono Ul Naldil, Commissar Gadlam.
I will say one of the things I think that works so well about this is it is one of those visually interesting shows that we've ever seen on this podcast.
I would agree.
And it's such a complicated idea that whoever, when they were building the visual language of this, they're just there's a place you can't see within a place you can see. And they really crushed that specific execution, I think.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's how do you do it? There's probably, you could probably think of a few different ways, but man, they hit a home run with it. I just thought it was exactly as one would picture a very, very bizarre, complicated process.
Well, this is 2018, right, that this came out?
Correct.
So this is a little bit past that sort of tilt shift craze that happened, right?
Yeah.
Because that would have been interesting if they just tilt shifted half of it. So they were there, but they were just very tiny. They looked like
very
models,
small,
yeah.
very small away.
That could have been interesting.
I mean, it's a similar setup with the lenses, but you just use them differently.
Right. It's a bit like as Jordan said, it's a bit like your background right now. You've got the
I'm
artificial
on
zoom.
Zoom. I've put the blur on behind me, so it's I'm in Alcoma talking to these idiots from Basel.
So my disappointment is, and not to spoil anything from your next couple episodes, but they do have the teasers at the end, which God bless British television.
I didn't watch them. I stopped them.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. yes, as to Steve's point, while the credits come up, they'll sort of like, give a few credits, grip, gaff, or whatever, and then you'll get a clip from next week's episode, and then here's who did transport, then another clip. So I think it's I did the same thing as Luke did. As soon as it started, I'm like, no, I can't watch it. It might ruin something. So I know they're there, but I didn't watch them.
Well, my concern is that, and it doesn't show it in the credits or not show it in the credits, so it's not a spoiler, but like, if we don't end up in Ore City at some time, I'm going to be pissed off. Like, if that's...
Oh, we have to.
That's the thing I don't want, is like 2 more episodes, and it's like, oh, we never got a series 2. It's like,
Steve, what if you find out the only way to get there is get hit by an 8-ball in the head? That's actually how you enter.
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
Just got to find a Nazi adjacent guy.
I mean, you're not wrong. My concern for the next 2 episodes too is that like there's so much premise set up here, so much promises being made that if they don't land, if they're not like mind blowing, it's going to be a bit of like, oh, that's it. All right, I don't care.
I do like the British take on American names too. That's one more thing. Malia and Yolanda. Like, just
Yolanda.
What are the most
Classic
American
North
names I can
American.
think of? Here we go.
I mean, it's no Barlow, that's for sure.
I would say, guys, Rusty Crowe in this role with his fake Russian accent really would have changed the whole thing.
I mean, this is now the second time we've talked about that movie in the last like 4 episodes. So maybe we're going to switch over and become a post-Exodus podcast.
Oh my God, guys, have me back next Halloween. I love that movie.
It was a great movie. I agree.
So much Vespa riding. He literally rides his Vespa from Rome to Spain over the Alps.
So good. It's so
no
funny.
helmet.
It's such a good movie.
So good.
Such a good movie. Oh, Russell Crowe, you're better now than ever. Anyway, Steve, thank you for joining us. It was great having you back.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for this. It was a pleasure to watch the show, and I'm going to put in a couple more hours to finish it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for finishing all your travels specifically for this podcast.
Follow me on TikTok, Emmett the Muppet.
Emmett the Muppet, he's got his TikTok travels around Europe and the United States. So you can see what you can see him go to
Cinecittà World outside of Rome.
There we go,
yeah.
Cinecittà World.
That's my favorite one. Anytime Jane has work that I'm not involved in, I go and find an amusement park. I've already got Six Flags picked out. Six Flags Fiesta in Texas.
Something to look forward to. And listener, thank you for joining us here. Of course, if you have any thoughts, if you want to email us from Oklahoma, you can do that at continuumdrag@gmail.com. It will be a breach. You will get breached as hard as possible, as legally allowed. But send us an email anyway. And of course, Instagram, X, and Facebook, we will have some clips from this. Hard one to clip, I would say, because it's not like visually it's fascinating, but it's not like it doesn't make a lot of sense out of context.
8-ball, one.
Yeah, 8-ball is going to be there for sure.
And then just blur. Just put blurry stuff up.
It's just very blurry for the most part.
What about one of the scenes where Barlow's walking and he's like, I see something in the corner. And you're like, it looks like it's painful.
What about one of the many scenes where he talks to a cab driver about the cab driver's problems?
It's just polite. That's really nice of him. He's a shockingly nice guy, despite being a hard-boiled detective with a wife that's missing.
He's pretty good, actually. He's a kind man.
Yeah.
He did yell at that archaeologist, though.
Oh, yeah, the head archaeologist.
Yeah, but he's a philosophical archaeologist.
That's true.
It's pretty annoying.
I'll allow it.
Didn't she call him a wanker, too, or was that somebody else?
Someone else.
All right.
Thank you for joining us, listener. And Jordan, I will see you on the next one.
See you then.
Can't get enough Continuum Drag? Commission a bonus episode for charity.
Want us to watch an episode we missed after using the escape pod or during a best of run? No problem.
Is there an episode of a series we've never watched or a TV movie you want us to cover? You got it.
Wish we'd comment on your favorite movie, content, or other weird media? Sure, why not?
All you have to do is make a donation to one of the charities selected by past guests on our website.
We suggest a donation of $50 per television hour of content we're watching, but everyone's means are different, so give what you can.
Get all the details about bonus episodes for charity on our website, continuumdrag.podbean.com, or follow the links in our social media profiles.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Ontario, Canada, and Seoul, South Korea. Theme music by James Rick Seidler, produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.